Kia ora no. I'm Rachel. Welcome back to my channel, which is all about wellbeing and activism. I wanted to do a shout out video basically today to the members of Black Rainbow. We worked together as a group for about a year, around 2010, and which is a long time ago now. Gosh, 10 years ago. But I really need to honour you guys, those members of Black Rainbow, and just acknowledge you early on in this channel. I could really hear how many of the things that I learnt in that group were coming through in the things that I was saying in that short series about advice for new activists. And so I really didn't want to move forward without saying how wonderful that experience was with you all, and how much it taught me. So backing up a little bit for everybody else who doesn't know this, I did that project as a PhD project. So I didn't want to mention that when I was doing the first few videos, because I can't emphasize enough how much it's true that I've been saying in those videos that I'm not an expert in well-being and activism. Categorically not. And I also, I wanted to really resist that temptation to list all of my credentials, like this is all the reasons why I have a right to speak on well-being and activism. You know, here's all the things that I've done, and all the things that make me an amazing activist or make my thoughts valid. I think that that's bullshit, and I really want to get away from that in this channel. I think that everybody who has some experience to share should share it, and can share it, and has something of value. So just, yeah, really wanting to emphasize again the not expertness of myself. So in mentioning a PhD, you know, that level of academic study does kind of sound a bit experty, right? But that PhD wasn't about well-being and activism, but it was something closely related to it, and something that sits behind my passion for well-being and activism, and that is how Māori, so the indigenous people of Aotearoa, New Zealand, where I live, and Pākehā, so the settler people, the white settler people like myself, how we work together in activism. And that was, you know, that's a challenging topic, and it was a really big learning curve for me. And so today, like I say, I want to really acknowledge those people from Black Rainbow, and just tell you a very little bit about that PhD project, and some of the key learnings that I took from it. Because like I say, those learnings sit behind a lot of what I'll be talking on this channel about, and I'll probably be coming back to them again and again. And yeah, again, just really wanting to acknowledge those wonderful people that I worked with. So, what do I want to say? The first thing I want to say too is, again, in recognising how much that group taught me, I want to say that the people in that group are in no way responsible for anything stupid that I say on this channel, or you know, anything that I get wrong is totally on me, you know. But I think a lot of what I get right, or a lot of the good things that I bring, I learned from the people in that group, or that was the beginnings of my learning in lots of cases. So yeah, where should I start? I will start by saying too that I'll put a link below, but the actual written up PhD is available. I think anyone can access it. It's available through the Victoria University of Wellington library website, and like I say, I'll link it below. And I really recommend reading it. It feels weird recommending my own work, and it's funny because I worked so hard on that PhD. I really wanted to have an impact for our community. I really wanted to share some of these intense learnings that I had with our activist scene, and I took up that project because there was pain in our scene, you know. So that the project is about, you know, how Māori and Pākehā work together in grassroots activism in the Wellington anarchist scene. And although people in that group had also been involved in, you know, student feminist movement stuff, environmentalist stuff, socialist stuff, queer activism, probably others as well, animal rights definitely. So there's lots of different experiences in that PhD as well. But we were all brought together, I guess, by the Wellington anarchist scene. And there was a lot of pain in that scene, and a lot of confusion, and a lot of just trying so hard to get it right and not getting there. And so I undertook this PhD as a way to give something back to that community, you know, as a way to spend a big chunk of time dedicated to thinking about these issues of how we can work together better. And you know, I wrote it in a way that I tried to make it very, very accessible, very easy to read, and very, very honouring of the people that I worked with in Black Rainbow. So I should say that what we did is we created the collective Black Rainbow to talk about the issues of how Māori and Pākehā work together in activism. And we spent a year meeting about monthly as a collective. There were 7 of us, so 2 Pākehā and 5 Māori people. And including myself, I was one of the Pākehā, and we just talked about how it is. And so then I wrote the thesis in a way that shares lots and lots of those conversations. I tried to really put the stories of those conversations at the heart of the thesis. So I think it's fun to read, and I think it's really, really interesting to read. But for a long time after I wrote it, like, even though I wrote it such as a resource and a gift to our scene, for a long time after I wrote it, I was really awkward about sharing it with people. I would find that people would say, "Oh, I read your PhD." Not very often, but people would occasionally come up to me and say, "Oh, I read your PhD," and I would be like, "Oh, okay, like, shame, don't know how to be with that." And I think that was partly just because it's such a vulnerable thing to put your learning in a body of work like that, and I was just exhausted. I was just straight up exhausted, and I went straight on to a really, really full on stressful job in the sexual violence prevention sector, and I just didn't have time to sort of process what I'd learned and how I take it forward into the rest of my activism. And so this channel was partly about me having space to do that now that I've got some chance to reflect. And yeah, so that's I guess the first thing that I want to say is I think it's worth reading, and it's available. So check it out if you want to see some really in-depth conversations about what it's like working across difference between Indigenous people and settler people in activism. And I think that even if that's not work that you're trying to do, there's lots of interesting learnings in there as well for working across difference generally. So yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying. I want to say thank you so much to the people of Black Rainbow Collective. Amazing, amazing people. And yeah, and I think the thesis is worth reading. So I also wanted to just share I'll sort of share it as one of my key learnings, but I'll draw on a bunch of different things that I learned as I talk around this today. I guess I wanted to say too that because I went on to that really full-on job in sexual violence prevention, I have a lot of regret that I didn't spend more time as I intended to feeding back to the anarchist scene here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, you know, really sharing those learnings and and making them accessible to the scene. And that was partly to do with where the scene was at in terms of not much happening, because we'd been pretty traumatized by state abuses around that time, and the scene was, I didn't realize it when I was writing the PhD, but the scene was kind of imploding. It's starting to flourish again now, which is wonderful. But more so than where the scene was at, it was really where I was at. Like I say, I was tired and I got wrapped up with other things. And I was cynical. I was kind of like, I kind of had lost some hope, actually, that the wider anarchist scene, which is white dominated, could change in the ways that it needed to really be a good place for Māori to be and work, and that that took some motivation out of me in terms of investing energy in that scene. I don't know if that is true or fear or just where I was at that time, but that's what it was. I was just a bit like, I'll put my energy elsewhere. So again, this is where some of my real desire to make our scenes be well comes from, because I think that if we are always tired and stressed and in a bad state, we're not good at stepping back and reflecting and taking on some of the things that we need to change to make it better for people who are the most marginalised in our scenes. And for those people who are the most marginalised, if it's an unhealthy scene, then, you know, all of that struggle and unhealthiness on top of the experience of being continually marginalised is just really, you know, destructive and shit, you know. So, yeah, I want us to be healthy. I want us to be happy. I want us to be looking after each other better. Sorry that this is a very rambly video. I didn't have enough sleep last night, to be honest. But yeah. So backing up, I'll share one of the key learnings that I had about working across difference in that thesis. And that is something that I touched on in the video about having your privilege checked, and that is simply listening, learning how to listen well. Sounds so simple, but it can be really hard. And I guess so when I say working across difference, I'm talking now from the perspective of what I learned as a Pākehā person. So a person with privilege, a person that has greater social power in our society, you know, what we can do better to work with Māori. And like I say, I think this is a transferable skill to anywhere where you find yourself privileged and working with somebody who experiences oppression. And that is, yeah, get better at listening. It came out so often in the conversations we had in Black Rainbow that Pākehā fail again and again to listen to Māori. And that's for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons, or one of the ways that Pākehā can dodge listening to Māori is by diminishing the Māori identity of the Māori people in our activist scene, by treating the Māori people that we work alongside, you know, our comrades, as not really Māori, or not as Māori as the Māori activists out there doing tino rangatiratanga work in their local communities, you know, with their iwi and stuff. Because the Māori people in the anarchist scene, for example, are more like us, more Pākehā seeming, and therefore not fully Māori. That's not true, but that's the thinking behind this kind of dismissal that that Māori people can experience working in white-dominated spaces like the anarchist scene in Wellington. And that is obviously really shitty in terms of, dismissing somebody, but it's also really harmful for those Māori people's identity, because, well, I mean, obviously being told you're not real Māori is going to be shit, but also the knowledge that Māori people have about their struggle and why it's complicated to be them in our society comes from their lived experience, comes from their identity. And so minimizing that identity, dismissing that identity, not recognizing it is damaging emotionally, and for their sense of self. And that's something, that it feels weird. It feels kind of yucky, actually, me just talking about these things on my own on YouTube. I really think it's better in the thesis where you can read it from the perspective of the Māori people themselves in that thesis. But that was one of the things that group taught me and told me, and that I really took away from that group. Another reason that Pākehā fail to listen to Māori is because anyone doing anti-racist work is expected to do it in this way that makes them the perfect educators of the white people receiving that education. And so any time that a Māori person doesn't present their concerns in a way that is perfectly palatable, so often that person presenting that concern is dismissed as too angry or too shrill or too emotional, like this is classic derailing stuff, and so that's another reason that Māori people are often not listened to, because they got emotional about it, which is fucked, because anytime people experience oppression, they experience it emotionally because it is painful to them and it sits on top of so many other experiences of oppression. And so it's natural that there's an emotional response connected to it, and it can be very, very, very challenging. Like, I know this for myself as a person who experiences forms of oppression. It can be very, very challenging to present your concerns in a way that is perfectly rational and calm and gentle and loving towards the other person. And actually, fuck that. Why should we do that anyway, right? So that's another reason why people fail to listen. And all of this, and another just basic reason that people fail to listen is just plain ignorance, just not being able to take in the information, the complexity that Māori people say to them, because it is all too overwhelmingly new and sits outside of the ideology or the existing knowledge or whatever of the white people who are hearing that information. Or the white people hearing that information have one or two little snippets of anti-racist kind of language or whatever and grasp onto that and just sort of focus on their knowledge and don't hear the complexities or whatever, right? And another reason is just that we are so, active is in the name, right? Activists, we're just so focused as activists on action, and hearing the exposure of racism is again emotional work, and it's confusing because it actually, for those of us who don't experience racism directly ourselves, particularly as white people, we have to every time we hear the exposure of racism, we have to have a shift in perception. We have to hear the world as slightly different than the way that we thought it was. And that's confusing. That slows us down. And often our scenes don't want to be slowed down. We just want to keep going in the straight line of action. And so if the information is confusing or disorientating, or if there's more than one Māori person in the group and they've got varying opinions, and therefore you can't be told just like this is what we're going to do, we're just going to go with that person's opinion, which is way too much responsibility to put on the one Māori person, if there is just one Māori person in the group, which happens too often. But if there's two Māori people and they disagree, like the whole group's going like, frozen, we don't know what to do, right? And that can be really frustrating for everybody involved, but particularly for the Māori people. But often the group just wants to move on, wants to keep acting. So it'll either sort of park that and be like, oh, yeah, we'll talk about that more later. Or it'll just choose one thing and plow ahead with it, so that the action can keep going, And so all of this gets in the way of listening. And yeah, so the thing that I kind of... so that's all kind of like, this is all the shit that happens, but just taking it back to my personal learning and like what I really, the kind of the shift that I felt in me, or the struggle that I felt in me as I was doing that work, is the real challenge to not do what I kept being told all the other white people were doing, and to learn how to listen. And like I say, that sounds like a simple thing, but really learning about all the reasons why that's a hard thing. And one of the biggest reasons that that's really hard is because it's really uncomfortable to just stay with the exposure of racism, and to really hear what people are saying, and I think particularly to recognize while you're hearing it how much you don't know. Just for me, how much I don't know, how much is just outside of my experience, and the awkwardness that comes with that, the feeling of not knowing how to behave, not knowing what to say, trying to say things to sort of show that I am in support, and hearing how fucking awkward and dumb it sounds, and just trying to stay in the room and in the conversation, hearing how dumb it sounds. That is uncomfortable, and that's the struggle, that's, I think, any of us who, like I say, in any conversation where we're on the privileged side of that conversation, talking to someone who experiences more oppression, that is the struggle, to just sit in the discomfort of that and keep listening and keep letting your brain stretch, and accepting the fact that it's slow, and that we can have an intention to want to be this righteous fucking ally, but it takes baby steps, and it's awkward, and it's not heroic. It's not this, like we've seen so many movies of, the white savior come in and suddenly understand what shitty racism is happening, and become this big hero of the people, and overthrow things and tear down signs, and fight people off. And it's just, that's not what it's like. It's not heroic. In fact, the less heroic you try to be, I think the better, because there needs to be this huge dose of humility for white people in anything to do with indigenous struggle. So yeah, just sitting with the discomfort of it, and knowing that doesn't change. That you can. I found that the more I learn, I'll start to feel like I've got a handle on things, and then like I said in the privilege video, next situation I'll be like, oh yeah, I don't know, and that is just the nature of it. That just as a little aside, that makes me think of something that I read in that burnout book that I was talking about last video about completing, or a couple of videos ago, about completing the stress cycle. And they talk in that book about, just as a little example of the science around, I can't even remember now, the science around frustration. And they mention in there that heterogeneous groups, so groups that are made up of people who are different from each other, have different identities and different experiences. Those kind of groups make better decisions. They come up with better solutions, but they are likely to feel less confident in the solutions that they come up with, and also to enjoy the process less. It's a harder process. And I found that really helpful to read, because yes, that's so true to my experience. But they didn't say in the book, but I couldn't help having a little giggle to myself of what's the flip side of that. The flip side of that is groups that are homogeneous, so groups made up of people who are all the same. So let's say a group of white women, for example, doing feminism, or a group of white middle-aged men, in leadership, coming up with solutions for our communities. Those groups are likely to come up with worse decisions, worse solutions, but feel more confident in their solutions and better about the process, I think that's really funny. And again, humbling, so just remembering that feeling frustrated and feeling not so confident in what you're doing is not necessarily a bad thing. You might still be doing, you're likely to be doing good work as you muddle through, as long as there are more people in the conversation. You're doing some really good listening. The other real thing that I learned, and this is related to listening, it's kind of like the real hard end of listening, because I guess what I was talking about through a lot of what I've been talking about is just listening when people are talking, when they want to mention something. But the harder end of listening when people talk is listening to criticism, right? Responding to criticism. And again, I mentioned this briefly in the privilege video about, someone challenging you and saying, I'm sorry, I'm going to work on that. That's the guts of it, but I just want to say again here that through hearing criticism from members of Black Rainbow, I really recognised through that experience how painful that criticism is, how much it can really shake you up and kick your confidence and stuff. When you're trying to do something, you're trying to get it right and you get it wrong, it sucks. But that experience really, taught me how much that criticism is a gift. That's work that other person is doing for you. And they're doing that work because they are invested in the relationship, or they're invested in the work that you're doing together. If they weren't, they wouldn't bother bringing that criticism to you. They'd probably just talk about you behind your back and walk away and not want to try, right? So that criticism is a gift, and it's also a chance to build trust. Like, that was one of the really, really interesting things of my learning, is that not only did it give me a chance to earn some trust by hearing a criticism and doing my best to put it right, to really listen to it and to respond well and to put it right and to value our relationship. But so it gave me a chance to be like, I'm not like those other white people who don't listen. Here I am listening, I'm doing my best. But so much more than that, it was a learning for me about how much I could trust the Māori people that I worked with, to see that I have flaws, to see again that I'm not going to get it all right, and to want to keep working with me anyway. It increased my trust in them to stick with me in it, in the struggle. And I feel hugely humbled by that trust and hugely grateful for it. And, I find again and again in so many situations outside of that group where I've experienced mistrust from Māori, which is so natural and expected. Just the reminder of how we have to earn trust again and again with every new relationship. It's not something that we can just be like, tick, I'm good with Māori now. That's not how it works. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. I don't want to try to cover the whole thesis. I think it's better to, like I say, hear the words of the Black Rainbow people themselves. They are amazing people, and I really, like I say, I really recommend that you read that. And I will probably return to stuff related to this Black Rainbow project again and again on this channel. I don't think I'll necessarily just regurgitate everything that's in the thesis, but like I say, this channel was kind of a bit of an integrating project for me, where I can take the stuff that I learned in Black Rainbow and think, well, where did that learning go when I was in sexual violence prevention, or where does that learning go now that I'm a parent, and all of that kind of thing. So stick with me, and I'll be referring to this again and again. Yeah, I think that's me for this week. Oh, this is the other thing that I wanted to say, sorry. The other thing that I wanted to say about this is the other reason why I wanted to mention this project early on in this channel is to really keep this emphasis on decolonization at the front of my mind in this project. It's really easy for white people, for Pākehā people to just walk away from decolonization struggle and be like, oh, it's too hard, or I need a break, or, hey, I'll just hang out with these white people for a bit who don't challenge me in that way. And I feel that pull and temptation all the time, and this channel could easily be a very general wellbeing and activist channel, and I don't want that to happen. I want to keep coming back to decolonization over and over, and my journey with that, and how that connects to well-being, like how white people can, I don't want this to just be the white people well-being channel, but I do want to, as, part of my own well-being struggle, and for other people who might be able to relate to this, I want to come back periodically to what it means to pursue well-being as a settler, as a person who is also actively trying to desettle their place in this society. Yeah, so this is aside from just shout out and I love you to the people in Black Rainbow, this is also a touch point for me to just really strongly state my commitment to decolonization, and that needs to be coming through in the work that I do. Keep me honest, and as an audience, keep me honest, please. So I'll leave it there. Thanks for joining me again, and I will see you next time. Ka kite, noho ora mai. Take care.